Hey everybody, I'm Nic Harcourt, and I have with me here for a nice conversation for the Latin Alternative Music Conference, Gabriel Garzón-Montano. It is a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for joining us. Where are you today?
I'm at the home studio in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights.
I'm guessing you've been spending a little bit of time there in the last year.
Yeah, quite a bit. The record was done in Dumbo, though, at Signal Corps Recording.
Okay.
And that's where the big board is, and then that's where the tape machine is, and that's where things really get done in terms of the tape recordings. The production and pre-production, I do here.
I was going to say, so this space is in your apartment?
Yes.
When 2020 started, which seems like 10 years ago now, but it's just a year ago, what was 2020 supposed to look like for you? What was planned for 2020?
It was me bringing the music to people in person, which is one of my strengths. So we were really looking forward to seeing the rap music come to life on stages and seeing me assume different forms, singing tender songs on the piano and then getting up and doing a perreo and then coming back, doing a guitar solo. We wanted to show the virtuosic breadth of what we had put together live. And I was thankful for Colors for that reason, because it gave us an opportunity to provide a stage for the work, so to speak. But yeah, it was going to be a lot of touring.
So needless to say, that didn't happen. When did you realize that things were going to have to change, and how did you adapt in those early days, not just as a musician or as an artist, but as someone on the planet trying to figure out how to have a life when everything just shut down?
Yeah, at first I was, you see things on the news and then you form your own opinion with the understanding that a lot of the time you're getting a manicured view or the desired outcome in perception that people
Sure.
want. So you're getting fed information on a need-to-know basis based on a calculated result. So I was afraid of going outside, and I felt like it was more responsible for me to stay with that reality and keep to myself. I think I sealed myself off in a way that didn't really do my mind too well.
Can you go into that a little bit? Tell us what happened.
I just started ordering all my food and having all my laundry done through an app, and it just became one of these, like, just constantly going down to check who's at the door, and yeah, I stayed at home, and there was a lot of Zoom meetings, as everyone has experienced. So it was a lot of lighting and makeup and clothing.
I think for most people who I've been talking to in the last year in conversations like this, when I'm talking to artists, a lot of people had not been used to spending that much time at home. I know that you're a guy who loves playing out. I know you're a guy who loves touring. Whether it's with your own project or when you're working with other people like Lenny Kravitz a couple of years ago or whatever. Had you ever spent a good chunk of time at home in your career as a musician?
Yeah, since late 2018, after I got off tour with Caliuchis, it was all pre-production for the record, and just a lot of research for myself and trial and error to get into these new sounds. And it was an extension of that. Instead of having the release of leaving this kind of hermetic space where I was with Arun Pandian, who was the engineer, and with Henry Hirsch, I was building up to that moment, and then it was more of that. So in a way, there was quite a bit of despair and frustration. And I felt like I was throwing away my baby, But I couldn't wait until the unforeseen end of this uncertain period.
Sure.
To put the music out and to work on a new collection in the meantime and then put it out, it made no sense to me. I said, you know, we have to give the music to everyone as it comes. Otherwise, I find that I'm very dissociated with the work. You know, I have to relearn my songs a lot when I'm about to brush up for tour and all that. I've read that that's not uncommon. And at the end of the day, none of these things are ours. We're just kind of vessels that are recycling all this information and electricity and then transmitting it with our own perspective. So yeah, it wasn't so different from what I had been doing. I think I was more fearful of strangers or of contact like that.
Not that I want to pry into your personal life or anything, but do you live it alone, or do you have somebody else in your space, or is it just you and your thoughts?
At first, it was just me, and then I started living with someone.
I would imagine that helped your state of mind.
Absolutely, it was a joy.
Yeah.
He's a musician too, so we started jamming and exchanging ideas, and yeah, it's really nice to rebound thoughts with somebody who's been considering all these things, and it's enriching to have conversation and to learn from somebody else. So being alone can become a feedback loop if you're not moving.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very fortunate that I live with my partner. I can't imagine how I would have made it through the last year if it had just been me myself.
Right.
And why, as you said, there was that loop that we all have. I think it just depends on what you do with it, I guess. But let's talk about the record. Obviously, you said it was done. When did you actually finish it? Done before lockdown, I mean.
Yeah, we were finishing. I think we kept mixing it actually once we got locked down, because we put it out in October. I think the final mixes came in the third week of July. That was when we signed off on everything. I remember I was still EQing the vocal to Meet on My Look. I remember running into my room and like just standing in front of the closet, downloading the file, playing it back through headphones, playing it on the Sonos, just making sure everything was cool. So that was in July. Now, after being locked in for 4 months.
I was going to say now, if you hadn't have been locked down, how would that process have been different? Would you have been in a studio doing that?
I would have been in the room, yeah.
Right.
I still had the option of going there masked.
Sure.
But there were so many hours between. I believe in somebody doing a bounce and saying, "Here's what I got up to. What are your comments?" As opposed to just being involved in every micro thing. Sometimes as something is shifting in the context of one element of it changes when the others move, you can have a new perception of it, and you can be quite like revisionist and paranoid, and then end up running in circles, doing things that then will sort themselves out once all the other pieces are addressed. So I just would rather somebody say, "I did a session. Here's what I came up with, and how does it strike you on first listen?" I think since me and the engineer both had such a closeness to the work, it was good that one of us wasn't in the room to have, some kind of like a consumer-like perception of it. And the ears do get burnt out, so it's hard to tell if you've been privy to all the changes and all the minutia up to that moment. So it was nice not to be in the room sometimes.
Are you somebody who in the past has perhaps been a little more micro managing on that part of the process?
I think this is the most involved I've been in, this was the record that I took the most time of like actively revising and mixing. I think Arun and Henry found, like they knew that it was a special collection and it felt really powerful, so they just wanted to make sure that the recordings endured, and I love and appreciate them for that. My first EP, I had 30 days to record and mix and master. That was all, and that was a extravagant production by my standards up to that point, considering I was working on GarageBand.
Right, right. A little different.
So I went from that to 2-inch tape with the Helios console and the works. So so with this, I was in the studio for 2 years. You know, it was quite a different thing, on and off. But there were periods where it was every day for months.
So over those 2 years, you know, we grow, we change. When you got to the sort of end of this, where you were finalizing and mixing things, how had you changed, and how had the perhaps process changed from when you set out? I mean, you said 2 years, and I realize it's not 2 years straight on. It's days in the studio, days mixing, days revising, or whatever. But 2 years is a long time.
It's a really long time
from conception to, you know, finishing it off. How different were you by the end of that process?
I felt like a refined version of myself, because it was a very work intensive period where it was just like doing photo shoots, getting the imagery together, figuring out what these songs meant to me and how I wanted to talk about them, delighting in how to explain having this so-called multi-genre offering where I hadn't really seen something like that. And so, yeah, I just became attuned to what the needs were, like philosophically, around explaining the project or presenting the work. Also, I sharpened my skills as a mixing engineer, you know, as a producer. There was a lot of investigation and A-Bing between my records and other people's, and just seeing really where I stood, as opposed to making something in a vacuum, which I also did. There's pieces on that record that were just played by their own rules, and I didn't really need to check anybody for it. But at the end of the day, if we're pulling up a bass sound, or if we're getting a drum sound or a vocal sound, a lot of the times we did quickly jump to Marvin Gaye and Sly Stone and Stevie Wonder and Prince, and just to see what it was. When I was doing background parts, I said, what's the maximum number I can have? I'll never stack 15 vocals ever again. You know, I'm never going to do that, like, college situation. Right. And I realized, so I listened to Strange Relationship by Prince, for example. And I was like, okay, what are the voices, and how do they push the air, and how do they fill the space? And I came upon the number 6. That was the absolute maximum of, like, individual characters that would actually poke out in a recording like that. And but anyway, just to answer the question, I was just a sharper version of that nerd, you know. In the meantime, a lot of my personal relationships, they didn't dissolve, but they lost their intimacy. And I came out on the other end of it very far away from most of the people I knew.
Now, was that a result of the work, or was that a result of lockdown? Is that a result of everything combined?
Yeah, it was the result of me being in a position for the first time in my life where I could be around the work all the time, that I didn't have to, you know, that I had sorted myself, you know, financially to support the process. And it was an opportunity that I had always wanted my whole life. I always hated going to school because they were taking time away from my music, but you can't explain that to adults when you're a kid, because, like,
of course,
you know,
yeah,
who are you, and who do you think you are? So I didn't find it hard to disassociate from my social, you know, and from the people who I consider my family. It was a very selfish time, you know. It was the creative ego just considering all the possibilities, and I was really delighting in knowing where I stood. Before, it was a lot more mysterious and slippery. I felt like I was playing harp with, you know, with winter mittens. But this time it felt like I was really grabbing the strings, and, you know, in a beginning way. I still know that I'll have that Twyla Tharp thing where it's like, at 52, I was a master choreographer, and I finally knew how to truly put all the ingredients into an ecosystem, and to see it in the micro and the macro in a very knowing and steady-handed way, right? This was it was the closest I had come to mastery, and you know, every day gets more so. But I I had spent so long feeling like I had no clue what I was doing, but knowing that I had some gift to bear, that it was a vacation for my soul to just engage and to be in total flow. But it was highly unbalanced, you know, and yeah.
You mentioned some reference records. You mentioned listening to Prince and you know, Marvin Gaye. What is it about those records that you wanted to be able to bring to your record?
Well, I think the first thing that really called me to making records in the first place was the 16-track format. You know, it was the Motown. If you're going to have more than that, everything gets bounced down and committed, and then you can look to Kanye as another example in the modern day, where it's like there's five sounds that are at play in any one of his mixes, you know, and that's just pop music. You know, you have your drums, you have your bass, something to that accompanies the top line, but beyond that, and then your little, you know, ear candies. Beyond that, you're really fooling yourself and just trying to put ornamentation where form is lacking, right? And if you look at Picasso's work and then you look at somebody doodling, you can see like the fear of committing is the difference between somebody who is expressing something succinct and somebody who is dancing around the lack of concept. And so those records to me were always just so devoid of bullshit. They were just to the point. And I loved the sounds. It was just the sound that appealed to me. I loved the recordings that the Beatles made. And even at their most maximalist, they were just so coherent, you know, guided by George Martin. And yeah, I fell in love with Earth, Wind and Fire and P-Funk and all that, and that the sound of that snare. And on this record, we really kept that spirit, and at the end we fried it a little bit, and it does sizzle above those records in that 10 to 20K range a little bit. But you know, and I have stuff like Blue Dot, which is just a totally different stereo image. It's a much more modern thing,
right?
It's like a chamber concept. But my idea was that whatever game I was playing, I would just play to the strengths of what had made records in those traditions work, and that it would have its own logic, and that it would succeed by that logic. So it was delightful to get sick of a song and then to go to the next one and to have it be completely different, and to go from, you know, turning the speakers all the way up and hearing an acoustic guitar and a string quartet and a harp, to then turning it down a little bit and hearing these drums thumping through, and like turning the subs on and off, you know, depending on what recording we were doing. It was a joy to especially at the end when we were just fitting the pieces into their final places, to have felt successful in my communication.
You mentioned setting yourself up financially to be able to do this. I would imagine that bought you a lot of freedom in the process.
Yeah, exactly. And it allowed me to do nothing but that.
Right. So by the time you sort of, I'm thinking about it now, because obviously you started a record in one way, but you finished it in another way, right? You started it before lockdown, quarantine, and pandemic that has changed the world, and you finished it in that situation. And I talked a little bit earlier on about, you know, how did you change from the beginning to the end? How did the finished record change? I mean, tell me what you went in trying to achieve. And I think maybe you just told me a little bit of that. And then tell us how you felt at the end of it. I mean, how would you describe this collection of songs?
I thought it was my most pointed and like strongest work to date. I really felt like each song was telling a story. I knew exactly what it was about. On my first EP, there was always a topic or a set of ideas that revolved around each other, or just kind of, you know, a positing statement for each track. But I just felt like I had more options in how exactly I wanted to show these things. So I felt I couldn't have been prouder. I felt totally self-realized. I felt like I had arrived. Everything I'd been working towards for, I guess, I was 15 when I made my first recording. So I was 30 years old, you know, it was in half my life. And I felt like, okay, I can do this in a way that I can put it up against other records that I really love. And I don't feel like there's a lacking. I feel like there's a peer-like quality. And so I was very relieved, you know. But there was also a really obsessive and uncertain quality to the work. Like, we didn't know how to do some things, so we had to chase many iterations. Like, Agüita was being mixed for a year to try to figure out how to do it before we finally went back to Logic and just took off all my little plugins that I had on whatever samples I was using. Like for the 808, initially I had made it way more 70s. I'd taken off the low end and taken off the top end, and it felt like bloated in the mid-range for obvious reasons once it was in its final. So I just took everything off and printed a 2-track. I was like, in Atlanta, this is what they're going to do. They're going to give you a 2 mix, and then you put your vocals on top. You record your main, and then your ad-libs, and then you're out the door. And that worked. We got the air moving again. For a while, it was very sluggish. Yeah, I mean, like I said, on a personal tip, I went in with a support system, and I came out, you know, not having spoken to my father in many months. I came out with a sister who was worried about me, with people who were asking me where I went, stuff like that. They knew I was working, but I kind of lost all sense of what was going on outside. And then I came back to kind of it was all a lot of peaks, you know. It was a lot of high moments, and then I came back to a valley afterward, without the release of moving around the world, sharing the work, and seeing it celebrated in front of me, which is it's the final part of the whole point, is to feel like I found something that we can all have in common for an hour, to celebrate and to weep about the lives we lead.
And for most artists, musicians who spend a year or 2 years, whatever it might be, writing and recording a body of work, the next step, of course, is you release it, and then you go out and tour it. Then you show people, you bring the songs to an organic setting, obviously, of being on a stage with an audience. Have you been able to connect with your audience through streaming events? I know you've been busy making other content and video content as well. How have you been able to connect directly with your fans who can't come and see you at a show? I recently did it was at a venue as well, a live stream for bands in town, and just singing the songs and walking on the stage, and you know, sometimes I would even like reach out to slap people's hands who weren't there, but and I would just take a moment and not sing the words, knowing that they would have been there with me and jumping around and just kind of inhabiting that part of the presentation. Is you discover a lot about your own myth making and about your own about your symbol, about the way you appear in that narrow part where it's just you're walking a tightrope with abandon and confidence, which is the reason that performers are so revered. It's like you're doing something that's so risky with all your heart. It's a high wire out.
And so people go like, wow, you know, it's powerful. It's like a superpower. So, and that was told to me by a vocal coach. He said they just throw you the keys. If you do that thing that could cause social harm, and you do it well, then that's an achievement there, and it brings people together in this magical way, where there's just this supreme energy being observed. For me, the tour not only is a way of just letting people know who you are in this more subtle way and seeing their joy, which fills you, but it's discovering the next chapter of your mythology, and your stage presence expanding, and your confidence growing, and seeing what works and what doesn't is a huge part of what makes it onto the next record and what propels you into the next part of the nature of your performances and your performance art.
We have a couple of minutes left, and I want to talk about what you're working on now and what's coming. But just going back to that idea of going into a venue that's empty and performing to a live stream. I had the good fortune through some other work that I do to be in the Hotel Cafe in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago with 3 artists who were performing for something that we were shooting.
Oh, wow.
Every single one of them was so happy to just be on a stage, to be in a venue, even though there was nobody there.
Yeah.
Looking at a camera and imagining that the audience is there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, describe that a little bit.
The stage is part of a ritual where you put on your war paint and your armor in the green room, and then you step out and you leave behind all these things that you associate with the worried human mind. Sometimes they come on stage with you as well. And in this case, a little bit of it did, because there was that enormous feeling of this is what it would have been like, and whatever. There's a sentimentality to it that couldn't be lost on me at that moment. But when you get on stage, there's something in their muscle memory that there's a purity in that experience, because it is a meditation, and you are zoning into something very particular and leaving the rest behind. And just being on the stage and playing music with other humans, it can only remind you of that. And it is very powerful. And, meditation is a luxury. The ability to focus on one thing is I think, the greatest moment for me in life.
Well, if you're able to, it's a true gift, no doubt. So obviously being at home, learning how to do some technical stuff that perhaps you didn't know how to do before. What else have you been able to do from home? Like, obviously you've been working on more demos, videos. What have you learned? I mean, is there something technical that you've picked up, a new skill in the last 9 months?
I think it's a very humbling thing that I'm going through with myself. I think also, as the noise of the world and you're interacting with it dies down, it brings you back to what you've been distracting yourself from. And mine is a very worried mind. And there's a lot of things that are very evident to people that don't make sense to me. And I think everyone has an area where they're just a little more confused. And I think, having spent that much time being so selfish and only working on my music and not really thinking about other people, and then entering the pandemic with this fever pitch of, like, doing Zooms with all the DSPs and just everything being a phone call about something relating to me and all that, without sharing it with other people, or without being just moving with other people. It was an extension of that distraction. But then when that was off, I found myself in a valley, learning how to just celebrate smaller moments. I think working on an album is such a epic feeling, and especially when you feel like you've landed in the place that you envisioned you would land. Usually the execution of something is where it all goes to die. You can have the fancy in your head, but even John Lennon was like, it's never what I thought it would be, and it's always something less. So to have it feel like more than what you could imagine, and then just coming back to this idea of yourself as a human and not as a creative energy, is super humbling. So I think I've been learning to do without distractions. And it's not a glamorous thing. It's just what's necessary to lead a full life, and to be realistic about how to take care of the vessel.
So let's just wrap it up with one last question, and that is: so things look like they're beginning to open up.
Yeah.
We're beginning to see venues having, it depends on where you are, of course, but in different states, different rules, but we are beginning to see venues opening up with reduced audiences. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about festivals this fall that seem to be a realistic option. What have you got planned for this year? You and I are speaking at the end of March. The LAMC where this is playing is in May, obviously. But what's in store for you? What have you got planned coming up later on this year, perhaps in the summer?
I'm making a salsa record, so I'm going to be going to Colombia to do half of that. Getting together with musical directors now to discuss that. There's some killing salsa bands in New York, so I want to see if perhaps it can be done here and there, and I think that'd be powerful. I have had a tour with another really brilliant artist that's been moved 5 times, so hopefully we can lock that in. And we have holes on the venues and all that, as everybody has had. And and I have 30 songs that I need to find a home for. I made an EP with my collaborator and my partner Andrexa. We did that in Miami in about a week. So, going back to your question about skills, I think I've learned how to finish ideas in a breath, as opposed to record the breath and then look at every particle of dust that I'm pushing. I think I've learned how to just make a statement with a weighted hand and accept it. But yeah, I guess 2 records and an EP and a tour is what's coming up for me.
Right.
I'm just finishing the songs that'll comprise the next record and seeing how I can expand on this notion of breaking myself into my 3 cultures, into my French mother, my Colombian father, and my mutt American self.
That's the next interview, because I'm really intrigued about what that mix of heritage brings to art. And I've had some conversations with a number of people recently who are they've got a lot of different background and ethnic backgrounds going on. So we ran out of time for this one, but it's been really great talking to you. I'm Nic Harcourt, and it's the Latin Alternative Music Conference, and our guest has been Gabriel Garzón-Montano. Man, it's been really a pleasure to speak with you. I hope we get to do it again.
So do I. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to look back and to acknowledge things. I appreciate it.
Thank you.